It's time. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Nightmare Tuesdays, where we dive into more of the fine works available from Nightmare Press. And this is one I personally have been waiting on for at least half a year. Longer? Maybe since the last release? I don't know. It's been a while. I've been waiting for this one. And I am so freaking thrilled at this coming up. So if I seem a little giddy and I seem really excited, it's because I fucking am. So let's get to things. What we have today... Actually, let me step back a bit. As I said before, this is Nightmare Tuesdays. We're checking out stuff from Nightmare Press. I will go through, read no more than the first two chapters. Depending upon the length of the first chapter, I may only read one. These are intended to give a little bit of an idea of what these are about, but please, if you do enjoy what you hear, go check out Nightmare Press's catalog. Go buy yourselves a copy of this book, the book from last week, or the week before that. I would say the week before that, but I haven't been recording these that long. But buy yourselves a copy. If you think a friend would enjoy it, buy a copy for them. Go and do that. Small, independent publisher. They are fantastic. They've also got a very near, dear friend of mine, Mr. Coyote Wallace. And I love supporting all of them. But I'm Cy, usually of Some Idiot Reads. Also, feel free to give a like to the channel, subscribe, all that yippity yap, bap 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 gap gap yap. I am not a rap god. Anyway, now we can dive in. Oh, I am so excited for this. Okay. What we've got today from Nightmare Press is the second release of Coyote Wallace, coming out on November 7th, 2025. It is currently available for pre-order. Links in the description. I'll come back to that later on after we finish. We have got... Okay. Sarah Corbin's Bloody Revenge. And really quick, because I have it pulled up here, the description provided... When Sarah Corbin and her family are killed in a midnight robbery gone wrong, she makes a deal for her mortal soul, in exchange for the chance to hunt down the men who burned her world to ash. Violent, unflinching, and tinged with supernatural overtones, Sarah Corbin's Bloody Revenge takes readers into the dark heart of Texas, where the air is heavy with gunsmoke and the streets run red. On the other end of Sarah's revenge is Lono Talbot, a murderous cutthroat who has parlayed stolen gold into a position of power in the small town of Gehenna. His network of gunslingers and outlaws, reinforced with his ill-gotten gains, has made him one of the most powerful men in the Texas underground. Too well protected for lawmen, Lono continues to grow his influence and power, until the mistakes of his past come a-calling. This is, as I understand it, a tale of Weird West. So let's get going. Again, Sarah Corbin's Bloody Revenge. Published by Nightmare Press of Shepherdsville, Kentucky. Written by Coyote Wallace. Copyright 2025 Nightmare Press. All rights reserved. Edited by Jacob Floyd. All cover work by Christy Aldridge of Grim Poppy Design. No portion of this book may be copied or transmitted in any form, electronic or otherwise, without express written consent of the publisher or author, which I do have, on both counts. I love you guys. Thank you. A Coyote's Dedication. To Faith and Kelly, for giving me a tomorrow to believe in. To Stephen, for being an angry little brother. To Morgan, Kaylee and Carson for new beginnings. To Jacob for believing in long shots. To Satyros for teaching me magic words to change the world. To Doc Stowe for championing the little guy. To Miss Truelove for being a real damned bard in an age when we need bards. To all of you out there who have ever looked up at the sky and wished upon the stars. And to Rick B. for patiently putting up with this crazy dream of mine. Shine on. Previous works, as ever, American Mystic, The Life, Death, and Rebirth of Jimmy Wonderful, as well as his Dispatches from Appalachia on Medium.com. Link will be in the description. Sarah Corbin's Bloody Revenge by Coyote Wallace. A quote, "All is not lost. The unconquerable will and study of revenge, immortal hate, and courage never to submit or yield." John Milton, Paradise Lost. The Dark of Night. The decision not to follow the Union Pacific Railroad west, and instead settle down in the town of Harper's Hope, Wyoming, was a blessing for Sarah Corbin when her husband shared the news. Bill Corbin, through his own hard work, had built his livery from the ground up. Not only were his stables the closest to town, but the horses, raised on the short grass prairie beneath a sky that stretched on forever, were tireless and well broken to sweet docility. The abandonment of all they had built felt as if it hinged upon the vagaries of fate. Some of the small towns that sprang up in the railroad's wake flourished, but a slow, withering death awaited others as their people followed the railroad like faithful hounds. Their skeletal remains littered the trail behind them, mute markers of sacrifices made in the name of progress. More than that, Samuel, fresh off his 10th birthday, had been in poor spirits at the prospect of leaving their new home behind. The roots were good for him, and the life of following the railroad was no place for a boy. Disease, rowdy men, and worse, were all part of the Union Pacific's push into the often untamed land that was their home now, and Sarah felt no small relief that her child would not know these accompaniments of railroad life any longer than he already had. Here, life would be good, and while not easy, nothing good was ever easy. It would be a life without the filth and squalor that she had known since she first arrived on the gleaming shores of America. The air here was sweet, the land tough, but honest, and, most importantly, there was room to breathe that air in. How bitterly she cursed herself for seeing a blessing instead of a curse when, 6 months after the railroad had departed Harper's Hope, on a night so hot they slept with the windows open, the riders came. The drumbeat of hooves and the startled cry of the horses in their stable pulled her awake just in time to see Bill taking his rifle down from the wall. "Stay here. I think someone's trying to steal the horses," Bill spoke, with the tight tones of one unaccustomed to confrontation, its bravado shot through with spiderweb-like cracks of adrenaline and fear. Sarah's love for the man had never been for the steel of his nerve, but for the gentleness of his heart. He was no warrior or gunslinger, no barroom brawler, or any manner of hard man you'd find in dime novels. He worked hard, was clumsy but earnest in his sweetness, and what they had built was founded on carefully earned trust. Life was cruel to girls fresh off the boat on the eastern coast. Crueler still were the men, and it had taken the sort of investments that can only a gentle heart could tender to buy back her belief in the ability to love. Yet, buy it back he had. "Wait, what are you doing? Don't go out there," she implored him, her voice a strained whisper. For a moment, Bill paused, and it seemed as if he might listen to her plea, whether out of indulgence, repetition, or simply his own fear. "What's going on?" Samuel asked in confusion from the doorway of his room as he wiped the sleep from his eyes. "Nothing. It's probably just some coyotes bothering the horses, that's all. Go on back to sleep," Sarah lied poorly. Her heart was beating too fast, and the words rang hollow as a result. Sarah's attempt to comfort the boy's fear with a look was all it took. Bill, rifle in hand, still dressed in the sweat-stained thermal underwear she'd purchased for him last Christmas, headed to the door without another word. She ran to the threshold, stopping there as Bill's silhouette slowly faded into the darkness, the stables just an outline in the abyss before him. There was almost no light at all. Thunderheads yet to deliver on their promise of a storm to break the heat hid the stars, for they would be pierced by nothing so paltry as the light of the heavens. "You there, whoever you are, make yourself known. I have a rifle, and you'll find me a better shot than most," Bill called in the darkness. He had always been a terrible liar. In a cruel twist of fate, Sarah saw them before he did, but her voice could not rise fast enough to warn him. They stood with the stillness of wolves on a mountain ridge in a neat line before the stable, more shadow than substance. She counted, her brain doing the sort of math soldiers called the devil's arithmetic. 4 of them. 4 of them, and 1 of Bill. Bill saw them half a second later. "Wait, you can have the There was a series of quick flashes, like fireworks, almost as if someone had lit candles in a string and then snuffed them out in one breath. The sound, that hollowed bang of ruined dreams and tomorrows turned to ash, didn't hit Sarah's ear until Bill's body hit the ground. Her thoughts jumbled, her mind refusing to process what it was seeing, shock making time itself run thick as molasses. She felt as if she was no longer inside her own body, but instead a spectator attached by some ephemeral string. She was powerless to move, or speak, or even blink, as one of the 4 stepped forward, his boots barely making a sound beneath him, and pointed his gun at the heap of shadows her mind didn't want to admit was Bill. "Mighty kind of you to say we can have them horses, mister," the gunman said, still draped in the heavy shadows of night, remarked almost jovially as he drew near. At the last moment, not Bill raised something from the ground. Only later would Sarah realize it had been his hand, making a final imploring for mercy. Then the thunder spoke again, and with it, at long last, came her screams. Screams that tore something loose deep inside her. Screams that ripped flesh from the inside of her throat, revealing the surface of a soul whose heart had been dealt a crippling blow. Screams she could only stop by clamping her hands over her mouth in the sudden horror that their eyes were upon her now. "Hey there, miss. Won't you wait right there so we can talk with you a spell?" The gunman, who had just finished off Bill, called to her. Another of their number called from the gloom. "Tom, Go help Leyland make sure there's no witnesses. We don't need a lawman on our ass. Frank and I'll get these horses saddled and ready to go. The shock, the horror, whatever stunning blow dealt to her, it wore off the moment the two men began to head towards the house. She loved Bill, loved him as much as a woman could love any man, but she loved Samuel more than she loved her own life. The only thought was to hide him, to protect him, no matter what happened. No matter what. She dashed inside, slamming the door behind her, locking it as fast as her trembling, shock-numbed hands could possibly move. How much time did she have? How long would it take for the men to reach the house and kick down the door? "What's happening? Where's Pa?" Samuel asked in the pitiful, begging tones of childhood that had always brought some moment of comfort from his mother in the past. There was no time to comfort him now. Mind racing, Sarah took him by the arm as she whisked him into the bedroom, thinking of places where she might hide the boy. The little house was dark, but it was her home, and she knew its every inch without a need for light. "Mama, where's Pa?" Samuel was no longer pleading, his voice now raw and bewildered with fear. She threw open the old trunk at the foot of the bed. The frilly white lace of her wedding gown and a smattering of other keepsakes pushed down as she did her best to make room for the boy, her mind still hammering out the answer to the infernal question of time and distance on which her life, and, more importantly, Samuel's life, now hinged. The answer came much sooner than she would have liked. The boy screamed as he saw the two silhouettes of men pass by the window, their features lost in the darkness. They seemed more shadow than flesh. Monsters, surely. Hellspawn, steeped in pitch that was still hot from the very core of the pit. Devils loosed upon the earth to sow terror and woe. No other explanation for what had come that night could make sense to the mind of a child. He had yet to learn that demons were poor substitutes for men when it came to making hell of anyone's heaven. Sarah seized the boy by his shoulders and lowered herself enough that her face was mere inches from his. Samuel's eyes, shot full of fear, streamed tears from their corners and down his cheeks. There was some almost detached part of her that saw how pale he was in that moment, how the fright had robbed him of all his color and left him like a porcelain doll. Time be damned, she kissed his forehead. "Samuel, listen to me. Listen. Stay in the trunk, and I will lead them away." As Sarah spoke, the horrible certainty that these were the final words she would ever speak to her child sank into her as if it were the venom of an old rattlesnake. "When they aren't looking, you run out the back door and don't stop until you get to town. I love you." Sarah found these words took more strength than any heart could summon. To speak those words broke something inside that would not heal or ever fully be right again. Not all of a person's dying was done with blood. The first slam of a boot heel against the front door rattled the whole front wall, the glasses in the kitchen clinking in their cupboards, but the latch that Bill had fashioned for their door held. His one final act of defiant protection for his family came not with the rifle that lay unfired in his cooling hands, but with craftsmanship that proved sturdier than it looked. "No, please, Mama, I don't want you to go." Samuel's voice was no longer a plea or even a terrified cry. It was only a wretched sob that was like broken glass ground into Sarah's heart. "Hush and get down. I will not tell you again," she snapped, and may well have broken into sobbing herself, were the terror not as thick as the clouds hiding the earth from the moon's eyes that night. Another bang at the door came as she all but forced Samuel down and closed the trunk. The hinges squealed, and the wood cracked, but the door still held, for now. The sound was enough to get her moving, though, away from the bedroom and toward the kitchen. She could hear them as she crossed through the familiar gloom, their voices carried effortlessly through the thin walls. "You kick like an old woman." So this was the voice of the man who had put the final bullet in Bill. Sarah found that she already knew that voice, burned into her mind, as well as she knew her own. "Fuck you and fuck this door." This voice was younger, less sure of itself, but like a young snake, it made up for it in an overabundance of toxicity. Another kick. This time, the door nearly came down, the bolt held in place by the last of its screws. The knife that she used on carrots and potatoes for the night's stew was the only weapon her fear-slick mind could see. With it in her hand, there came some small, desperate glimmer of hope. The mad idea she could slash and stab them with its blade, and ward them off like wolves retreating before a torch. Samuel would be safe. She would be safe. And that was the huckster's promise of the blade. Despite that hope, she screamed when the door finally came down. The men that stepped through the ruined doorway did so with the casual ease of a banker coming to collect upon a tardy lien. The man in the lead, the one who had kicked the door down, was smaller than Bill's killer, slighter of build beneath his filthy duster. His neck, adorned with a dark handkerchief, was a color that might have been green or blue, but in the shadows appeared black. When Sarah saw his face, clean and barren even of the faintest hint of a beard, her mind choked on the realization that he was but a boy himself, perhaps 7 years older than Samuel himself, but no more. His companion had no such gildings of youthful innocence. The easy calm of his bearing spoke of familiarity with murder. His grin, dripping with an imp's malignant mirth, remained plastered upon his mouth like a hellish mask. The elements had frayed and tattered the wide brim of his hat, as if he had endured storm and boiling sun alike, just to arrive at Sarah's doorstep on a night so black it had cast the sun into the depths of hazy memory. The barrels of their pistols roamed the room like divining rods, and for a moment Sarah wanted to simply press herself into the corner of the kitchen and not make a sound. This was the same logic that had long saved the rabbit from overeager coyotes, and the deer from the foolish hunter. An instinct that was as old as mankind itself, perhaps even older. Despite this logic, the moment the gun barrels passed over the bedroom door, the shout leapt out of her. "Stay back. You've already got the horses. We don't have anything else." Sarah brandished the knife in front of her, the blade wavering up and down, her shout having drawn their attention. Their guns slid to her in one smooth motion, promising oblivion. For a moment, that wild notion of hope persisted, the two of them motionless, seemingly dumbfounded by the woman and the kitchen knife she'd held up like a cross to ward them off. "Looky here. I knew she'd be pretty, Leila. Could smell it on the porch." The young door-kicker couldn't keep the note of lecherous laughter from his voice. Sarah pressed her back against the wall of the kitchen a little firmer and grasped the handle of the knife in both hands, holding it out before her, the blade bobbing with the electric current of fear that ran the lengths of her arms. She was crying now. She didn't want them to see her crying, didn't want to give the filth the satisfaction, but the tears came anyway. The terror was a rough, cold fist that squeezed her heart and forced it to pump ice to her limbs. A malignant spell that stole away the ability to run. Had it not been for the wall behind her, her legs would have given out beneath her. The man that the door kicker had called Leland made no hurry to turn his attention to Sarah. Instead, he peered around their humble home, his dark eyes squinting against the shadows as they dug through the life that Sarah had made like hungry dogs digging up shallow graves. He took a few cautious steps forward, his head cocking to the side as he listened, and only when satisfied he'd heard nothing did he pick up the old lantern from its place on the kitchen table. It's darker than a well-digger's ass in here. Let's get some light going and get a better look at our kind hostess, Tommy. Leland spoke with the easy calm of a man who might have been on a leisurely stroll, had his interest caught by some roadside novelty. How strange it looked through Sarah's terrified eyes as he went through the laborious process of lighting the kerosene lamp. The glow spread quickly, pushing the shadows back and away, but at the end of the light there was no comfort, only exposure to the eyes of men with gazes like hungry wolves. "Stay away!" Sarah shrieked and gave the knife a wave. They only laughed. The lamp in Leland's grasp gave Sarah her first real glimpse of the men who had torn her world asunder. The younger one, the door-kicker called Tommy by his compatriot, was just as young as she'd thought when she'd glimpsed his beardless chin. The youth reminded her of a weasel more than a young man, with his cruel angel's lips and small glittering eyes like tainted well water, poisoned by countless sins. He wasn't handsome or ugly, but instead a brand of pretty that would have done him no favors in the rough saloons or in the company of men long at the trail. His eyes were the yellowish green of a mountain lion, startling in their beauty, soul-wrenching in their lack of compassion or mercy. Leland had no such gildings, and if his face had ever known innocence, then Sarah could not have imagined it so. Not in the state she was in then. The glow of the kerosene lamp may have dispelled those shadows that clung to the air around him, but it only served to deepen the ones that stubbornly persisted beneath the brim of his hat. His eyes were on her, and though his grin was wide and hot with hell-stolen mirth, it did not touch those dark eyes. Nothing did. Nothing would. Not her screams, not her pleas, not the danger of the knife. If the young Tommy was the sick puppy grown to a rabid dog, then Leland was the old master that taught that dog to go for the throat. This place is a dump, Leland said as he moved the lamp about to cast its glow on the life that he and the others had ruined. "I don't know. I reckon the scenery ain't that bad," Tommy the door-kicker teased as he advanced on the woman, his Schofield in one hand, the other open as if to signal he meant no harm to her. "Just, let me add that pig sticker, and we'll be on our way." Tommy approached, his voice halting and choking on the sobs. She kept the knife thrust out before her as if it were some magical ward that could keep the men away. "Oh, now, come on. Ain't no sense in you being that way. Just let me have the pig sticker, and we'll be on our way. You can come with me. Just think all the fun we could have. I'd keep you Ow! Fuck! The knife had moved, seemingly on its own. A quick and jagged upward slash that carved open the cheek of the young man so deeply that the flesh at the bottom of the cut sagged like a second open mouth. Blood, made dark by gaslight, splashed across the wall, the scarlet droplets striking against the small oval portrait of Bill and herself that hung on the wall. Tommy's hands flew up to his face, his gun forgotten, falling free from his grasp as he wheeled around, clutching at the wound, blood pouring through his fingers. Sarah saw the opportunity, made as clear as day, as if by divine providence. A moment where balancing the scales seemed possible. Above all things, they could not search the house. Above all things, she had to make sure that they wanted to leave before the thought could ever cross their mind. Samuel was all important, and compared to him, her own life was nothing. When Tommy turned his back on her, hand still pressed to his cheek, she brought the knife up. She'd never killed anything more than a chicken for dinner, and yet, as she brought the blade back, she knew the space between his shoulders was where to bury it. She had every intention of it. The blade was racing towards its mark, and even if it meant her demise, it would surely be enough to drive them away. Leland would have to carry his wounded comrade from the home, see to him quickly, and, in doing so, would have no hope of stumbling upon Samuel. The shot rang loud, but she did not hear it. Instead, she felt it, all the way down to her bones, into her very bowels. When the first bullet hit, there was no pain, just a force that felt like a mule kick. First in the shoulder, then another against her chest, and a third in the small of her belly. The impacts came like blows of a rapidly thrown fist, but no pugilist alive could have strung them together so quickly. The blows threw Sarah against the wall, and now her legs did cease their working. The pain came now, roaring and wild, bigger than the light of the lamp or the darkness that hovered on its borders. The pain was everywhere and everything. She tried to scream against it, to let it out, but all that came was choking and the hot taste of copper in her mouth. Leland gave the Colt Navy a clockwise spin, reversed that spin, and reupholstered before Sarah even had a chance to know that he had shot her. "That stupid coos tried to cut my eye out," Tommy shouted at Sarah's killer, and she took some small measure of comfort as she choked on her own blood at the pain in his voice. Sarah couldn't move. She felt like a puppet having its strings cut in one quick swipe, but she could hear Leland's boots on the floor as he made his way over to her, still holding the lamp. Distantly, Sarah remembered buying that lamp from the general store in town. The owner had sold them 3 for the price of 2. How silly haggling for a good deal seemed now. When he stopped by her feet, he gave her a little nudge with the toe of his boot. Even that little movement caused a starburst of pain, and when she tried to scream this time, the only result was a bubble that formed and burst right there on her lips. She could feel the warmth spreading beneath her, her life seeping into the old wooden floor as her heart fought to keep beating. "Well, you should learn to be faster. Goddamn shame. She was pretty, and I had to fucking blow her guts all out. Christ, that's rough to look at." Leland's lips curled up in disgust, as if he had just stepped in a steaming pile of cow shit. "Is the stupid whore still alive? Tell me she's still fucking alive," Tommy snarled, and his hand came away from the cut, the grisly outline of his jaw teeth visible on the other side of the wound he'd wear as a scar for the rest of his life. She'd hoped Jesus would take her before he could get his vengeance. The tears welled up in her eyes as her brain kept screaming at her heart to keep pumping, to keep fighting, to keep going, even though the rest of the system was now collapsing in on itself. Her lungs kept filling up with blood. Her legs and everything below her navel felt as if it were in a tangle, even though she could see they were straight, and a heaviness had begun to settle that made even blinking seem impossible. Maybe. Not for long, though. Bits of her insides are on the outside, but I reckon she might still be in there, Leland sounded, as if he were a particularly affable salesman trying to move discounted or damaged goods. A slick killer's glibness painted his every word. He didn't have the purity of Tommy's cruelty, but he had no objections to that cruelty either. And in the flat black of his eyes was the sense that he might just like to watch it play out. For some men, the suffering of others was a rarefied dish, indulged in with just enough rarity to keep its flavor fresh on the tongue. Sarah tried to fight down the wretched excuse for a cry of pain, but lost that battle. Even that little dignity denied, no matter how much she inwardly fought and prayed for it to be otherwise. The heat of her own blood splattering on her cheeks from the choking sound was a bitter contrast to the creeping cold that had already begun nipping at her extremities. Dying was easy, but she couldn't let go. Not yet. Not until she knew Samuel was safe. She was no fool. If the Lord was to dispatch angels to be her saviors, they were late in coming. No miracle would pull Bill back up off the ground. And no miracle would push the awful mess back into her belly or pull the bullet from her lung. If there was a God with a son who had given himself up for the sins of man, then Samuel would slip away, and that would be good enough. That would be all the reward for her lifetime of devotion that she needed. She would let go and sink into that cold darkness to whatever end awaited her. Sarah asked for no more, even then, with blood pooling beneath her and her body working through the final indignities of its slow death. Her killers looked down at her, the glow of the lamp in Leland's hands painting their faces in its light. The wound on Tommy's cheek was a gusher, and his blood seeped steadily through his fingers, falling in little pattering drops onto her ruined nightgown. She had time to finally wonder at what had brought them here. What series of events could have conspired out there in the darkness to bring them to her home that night? The question of their point of origin, their backgrounds, who they were, and what they had done all drifted like lazy clouds across her mind. The cold crept a little further up her limbs, almost imperceptible in its advance, hiding itself beneath the gradual dissipation of the pain. As long as she lay there and didn't move, the pain would go away. The cold would take it away, along with the fear and the sorrow. Sarah only needed to embrace the cold coming to take her, and it would, at long last, be mercifully over. Her heart struggled to slow, fighting itself and the desire of its owner to let go. The cold gathered, sucking up the light and casting the world around her into deepening shadows. Only the lantern in Leland's hand remained. It may as well have been the last sunset she would ever see. The battle to hold on, to stay amidst the pain and the wretchedness, instead of letting go, was a losing one for Sarah. Try as she might, as much as she wanted, the hurt was too much. It was just too much. "Mama?" Samuel's voice crossed the abyss like an arrow fired into her heart. The men turned like wolves to the sound of a bleeding calf separated from the herd. No, 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 no. The flesh was ruined. The blood, what remained of it, poisoned with its own foulness. But Sarah's spirit, the very fire that fed the engine of her heart, still burned. In one final moment, given strength in equal measure by love and the same instinct that drove the grizzly to fight to death for her cubs, she pushed through the cold and back into the pain. To roll to her side and throw her arms around Leland's ankle required more effort than anything she had ever done. The pain was so great, it obliterated every thought in its path, and had she not choked on blood in the effort, she would have screamed in pain, fury, and a final, mad defiance of fate. Leland kicked her away as if she were nothing. Sarah's efforts, her final offering of pain, and the last bits of her strength were not enough. The meek may have stood to inherit the earth, and good would surely triumph over evil, but neither conclusion would be forthcoming that night. The glow of the kerosene lantern exposed that God's law held precious little sway in the wake of the railroad. Here was land of wolves, and their law suffered no weakness and no heart for innocence. "I'll get him. Come here, you little shit," Tommy began, only for Leland to quiet him by laying his hand upon the younger gunslinger's chest. Leland set the kerosene lantern down on the table and held up both hands as if to show he meant no harm. As he went to take a step forward to close the distance between himself and Samuel, the boy took a step back. "Don't pay no mind to my friend here. He's still shook up from them Injuns we chased off. Looked like they done hurt your mama something fierce. Sure as hell cut good Thomas's face down for him when we burst in." The lie was transparent, but Leland didn't care. All that mattered was the talking. He was like a snake hypnotizing a bird. "Goddamn savages all over the place," Tommy added, somehow less convincing in his efforts than even Leland had been. No, God, please, run. Sarah tried to move, and all that she could manage was a choking whimper. The agony was nothing compared to the way Samuel looked at her, his wide eyes taking in a sight that would brand itself on his very soul. To Sarah's horror, the man who had put 3 bullets into her advanced anew, and this time Samuel was slower to back up. Jesus. "Now, we're going to stay here and keep an eye. Try to patch your mama up as best we can. But you need to run to town and fetch the doctor. Be quick, and everything will be all right, I promise." Leland's wide grin came attached to the words, and he spoke with the patience of a man who had picked up a passing familiarity with the art of lying to children. Leland skirted right by Samuel and opened the back door, even going so far as to hold it open with one arm. Tommy, still clutching his cut cheek, seemed puzzled by this, and for a moment Sarah's hope seemed to still live. These men were killers, predators of the worst sort, but they were not monsters that would kill a child, not even to save their own skins. Her prayer had been answered. By the time that Samuel got to town, found the doctor, and alerted the sheriff, the men would be gone, and she would be dead, but Samuel would live. For a moment, Samuel hesitated, and his eyes came back to his mother's own. There was no strength in her for words. There was no power left to her that could have moved her ruined and wrecked form from its place amidst the blood on the floor. There was no contemplation of words that would be unsaid, of scars that would remain on the boy's heart, or even the simplest of truths that was, "I love you." There was the dying and there was that last moment when she looked into his eyes before he turned to run for the door. That was all. Leland stood for a moment in the doorway, watching Samuel run across the flat, wide, open expanse of Wyoming soil. He looked up to the sky, still heavy with thunderclouds and their efforts to blot out the heavens, and then leaned against the doorframe. The grin washed from his features like a coat of cheap paint in a rainstorm. You know that Lono isn't going to like that you let the kid go. You know how he is about people seeing our faces. Tommy told his counterpart, wincing at the pain that came with his own words. Another small victory for Sarah was that the wound was going to leave one hell of a scar. You and me, we're bad men, Tommy. Lono's the sort of prick that would make old Scratch jealous, Leland mused, his hand drifting down to the Colt Navy that was 3 bullets light in his holster. The iron whispered against the leather as it came free. Sarah could only lie there on the floor, unable even to find the strength to close her eyes against the unfolding nightmare. Oh God, please, please stop them. Please. Besides, Tommy, I ain't letting him go. Ain't you ever killed a rabbit before? You don't come walking up to him waving the axe in your hand. You pick him up, give him a few pets. Leland brought one arm up and used it to steady the barrel of the Colt Navy. And when the rabbit feels safe, the hammer on the Colt came back, and the sound of the chamber turning was the only noise that reached Sarah's ears. God, please. Sarah's prayers were lost in the stillness. Boom. As Sarah Corbin lay dying, her heart reduced to its final handful of beats, the man stepped over her like she was a dog's unfortunate mess on their way out. Leland alone paid her a final mind as he passed the table and picked up the lantern. He looked back at her, his murderous partner already out the door, and gave her a wink before he tossed the lantern back inside. The glass shattered, and the flames whisked across the floor, ravenous in their newfound freedom, but these were not concerns for Sarah. Though Sarah's heart had not quite yet caught up to the truth, she was dead. She died the moment Leland had fired his gun from the doorway. Not a death of the body. That was still taking a troubling amount of time. But it was a death of the spirit and the soul. She had been a good woman, a God-fearing woman, and though she was not without her sins, who was, she was certain they were not so great as to earn the end that had befallen her family. As the flames began to race their way up the walls, licking and spreading across the rooftop and washing over the Schofield that Tommy had left upon the floor, the world began to slow. The embers fell with a gentle laziness of snowflakes, and the flames halted their dancing, frozen yet shining with their hungry light. Sarah's heart came to its final beat. The back door that Samuel had fled through, the same door that Leland had leaned himself against, the frame of, as he snuffed out not just the last vestiges of hope in her heart, but the very fabric from which her faith was woven. It squealed on its hinges. The flames ceased their dance, and though their stillness held, proving it was no mere trick of Sarah's dying eyes, the heat above those flames continued to distort the world behind them. The smoke, thick and well fed on murdered dreams, churned but dare not make its escape. Whatever strange property halted the fire held it, and paused Sarah's heart on the moment before it could deliver its last beat. What stepped through the door was not a man, though he took the greatest of efforts to make it seem as such. No man moved so languidly amidst ruin and wreckage. He was tall and thin, taller than any man Sarah had ever laid eyes upon, and he had to dip his head as he passed through the doorway. His hair was the color of the setting sun, and the glow of the flames only made those highlights of gold and red more vivid. Sarah's newest guest, arriving at the final moment of her life, wore the smart black three-piece suit she recognized from the Eastern Railroad men that had visited Harper's Hope so often during the early days of its construction. A length of silver chain, hinting at the watch attached to it, dangled from his pocket and caught the glow of the fire that stood in rapt attention at his wake. All finery aside, there was but one item that did not fit. His boots were old and threadbare, the heels worn down to their very nubs, and tears lined their sides. The tears hung open the same way the cut down Tommy's cheek had hung open, but he earned this damage through long journeys down innumerable streets. For one moment, Sarah's new guest paused and looked around the little home that had only hours before been full of love and hope, now full of smoke, fire, blood, and the smell of Sarah's own dying, and seemed to sigh. "You know, I keep telling her there's nothing you little monkeys do better than butcher each other. You have a real knack for it, and if this century doesn't make her give up the ghost, well, then the next one." The stranger stepped around a patch of burning floor the way a gentleman might avoid treading on blooming petunias, his musings momentarily trailing off. Only when he'd crossed around the flame did he seem to see her, and Sarah could do nothing to look away. The eyes that met hers were not fashioned for this world. The quality of their amber coloring too vivid to pass comparison to anything as dingy as those owned by man. There was a horrible familiarity in that gaze, the same hunger that had been in Tommy and Leland's eyes in the moments before they set upon her like wild dogs. But it was deeper, purer in its quality, and unfettered by the distinctions which so often govern the appetites of mortal men. There was another quality, though, one that served to temper that vast, infinite hunger that made Sarah wish death was a little faster on the draw. Joy. Now, forgive my rudeness. Look at the state of you, and here I am prattling on about work. I am truly sorry. Truly. Manners maketh the man, and I've the manners of a beast. Do you mind if I sit? I'm going to sit. The stranger moved alongside Sarah's prone, near lifeless body, and settled himself down with his back to the same wall that Sarah had hit when the bullets tore through her. He paid no mind to the blood or the gore, just as he had paid no mind to the choking smoke or the fire that stood still in his presence. He stretched his arms out and released a mighty sigh, like a man who had just woken from a long nap or after a particularly good meal. Look at that, the stranger remarked with lazy amusement as he reached over and plucked Tommy's dropped Schofield from the flames. He turned it over in his unprotected hand and was, for a moment at least, seemingly lost in contemplation. "Do you know who I am?" The stranger did not cease his study of the gun when he asked the question. Sarah could not speak. Her tongue was a dry, dead thing in her mouth, but her mind, tattered, torn, and frayed by both sorrow and agony, persisted. "My lord, who Whew. I'll take that as a yes. Good. Now, the real question is, what do you want? Do you want to lay there and hope that you die before the fire gets you, which you will not? Or do you wish for another end to your story? The stranger arched one fiery eyebrow as he posed her the question. The answer came without thought, compelled by love to the forefront of her mind. Samuel and Bill. All at once, the stranger's beautiful face contorted into a monstrous mockery of its former beauty. The beautiful lips pulled back to reveal long canines like those of a jackal, and his whole long body seemed to bend double, just so he could place his face inches from Sarah's own on the floor. The expression was one of such pure and unadulterated disgust, anger, and loathing, that even dying upon the floor, there was a stab of genuine fear that he would snatch her nose from her face with his teeth. I do not cater to the profanity of love. The stranger growled like an animal, the veneer of humanity showing through its cracks like the painted face of an old whore. Your son is dead. The bullet passed through the back of his head and out his open mouth as he ran through the dark. I can still smell his fear on the air. Your husband, at the moment of his death, would have traded anything for his own life, even you. I can taste his desperation as sweet as honey. But you, down in that pretty, pure heart, I smell something much more useful than love. So I ask again. Just like that, the stranger's face was gone from Sarah's field of vision. All that remained was the fire and the open back door. What do you want, Sarah Corbin, formerly Sarah McLanahan? Tell me, what do you want? The stranger's voice no longer merely reached her ear. It echoed in the bloody chasm where her heart once kept Samuel. I want them to pay. The stranger's eyes blazed. Their amber depths no longer reflected the flames, but matched them instead. He rose to his feet, leering down at her with all the black joy of the owl watching the field mouse poke its head from their burrow. The stranger dropped the Schofield back into the flames and took a step back. I will give you the power to have your revenge. No weapon fashioned by man will cease your quest. No man fashioned by God will prove deadlier of aim. And every man responsible for the death of that you loved will fall before you. In exchange, I am promised 2 things. The stranger held up 2 fingers, as if to illustrate this point to the dying woman whose soul was already on the table. The first is, of course, your soul. And the second is that you spare no man who stands in your way. The last tear left in Sarah's broken form worked its way down her cheek. Yes. Thinking it won't do. You have to say it. Say what you want. Pick up the gun and say the words. There was something lurid in the stranger's voice then, something charged and vile all at once. Sarah found that she cared very little about the stranger's vileness after the torture inflicted upon her. All of Sarah's strength was gone, her lungs full of blood, her spine mangled by the same bullet that had ripped through the soft, yielding tissue of her guts and punched its way into the wall behind her. There was nothing left. Nothing at all. she had spent the last of her strength trying to keep Leland from Samuel. Now, there was only the ghost of her will left at the end. The very core of her soul was all that she had to draw upon. With Herculean effort, she began to crawl forward, pulling herself through the blood and the ruin of her own murder. Every moment brought agony that produced stars more brilliant than anything ever seen in the night sky before her eyes. Every breath was the inhalation of broken glass. Her eyes stung with the smoke, and still she pulled herself across that floor, nails chipping, tearing away, lost in the process of hauling her weight forward. The voice that slipped from behind Sarah's lips was unrecognizable to her own ears. It was too dry, too bitter, too harsh. A voice that had the warmth of gravestones and the gentleness of the Badlands, where only the coyote, rattlesnake, and scorpions called home. Revenge, Sarah croaked, and for her soul, she was given the strength to reach into the fire and take hold of the old Schofield. She screamed in burning agony. Overhead, the thick clouds boomed, and the rain finally began to fall. Fuck! Oh my god. Well, I had a hunch. Congratulations, Coyote. You're the first one I'm not reading 2 chapters of. This is an hour already, none of which is an iota of wasted or lost time. Holy damn. That is a hell of an origin murder. Dude. That is... the descriptions that you wind up doing through the course of that is painful. The desperation that she feels during that, very clearly conveyed. And I genuinely felt filthy and hated myself reading some of the lines coming from Leland and Tommy. So there's that one as well. Thanks for that. Excellent job. Well done. I mean that. No facetiousness. I should feel dirty and disgusting by that. They're that kind of people. Also, very interesting there with the strangers showing up. That is a hard shift for it, but it works. It's the right kind of narrative hard shift in the context. No, I don't have much in the way of like serious notes on this one. I love every second of this. God. I particularly liked, where was it here? Yeah. With, again, I like it from a narrative standpoint in terms of like writing quality with, Leland sitting down talking to Samuel, just like, God, that felt so horrid. Oh, that was really solid writing. I really appreciated that. I think that went a long way towards like the stuff at the beginning, with what I'm assuming. No, wait, the one that shot Bill, that was Leland. I think that was what it was. I think I'm tracking the ones right. You could tell like they're terrible people. These are not good people. That is, I think, where it was driven home for me, was him talking to the child. Like that made it so much worse. Her desperation trying to get Samuel put, like hidden. God, and then just having it torn away like that. Oh, yeah. Dude, this is so good, and I cannot wait to dive more into this. Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh my god. Okay. I hope you enjoyed this Nightmare Tuesday, everyone, where we have gone through with Sarah Corbin's Bloody Revenge. I didn't even get to the revenge itself. We just got the bloody portion of it. She is now empowered to go get her revenge. And I hope that wets your whistle to want to know more. At the time that this is being released, this book is still available for pre-order on Kindle through Amazon for, I think it was $3 on Amazon. It is not that much. Go buy a copy of it. Come on, pre-order it. It's coming out on November 7th. If you happen to be catching this after November 7th, 2025, hi, welcome. Check out the rest of the stuff that we have for Nightmare Press on here. Check out some of the other Some Idiot Read stuff. Check out a whole bunch of stuff. There's plenty of things here. But importantly, if you're checking this one out specifically after November 7th, go buy yourself a copy of it off of Amazon as well. I believe the link will stay the same. And I will have several links down in the description of this. I'll also say, because Coyote, you were not kidding with some of the stuff that you've said off to the side about how, like, yeah, no, this is a less gonzo and more, well, like the title said, more bloody. And no, you didn't pull any punches on that one. I have a vague feeling that you are, if anything, kind of reserved in some of the descriptive that you were going with. Like, I know that you can write gore, but, like, I'm not talking about writing gore porn, even though you certainly could. I know you can. But I feel like, what is it? It's like that electricity before a thunderstorm. I feel like there's a lot more coming in the rest of this book for just how intense this is going to get, and I am here for it. So, okay. That is what we have got here. Go buy a copy of the book. Also, by the time this comes out, yesterday will have been Coyote's birthday. Give him a good birthday present. Go pre-order a copy of this. Also, go check out his Dispatches from Appalachia on Medium.com, as well as the Some Idiot Reads that I have of those. Check out the previous Nightmare Press items that we have in here. Last week's Murky Shadows by Belinda Brady was fantastic. And there are, there's A Soul a Day by Todd Sullivan, and A Scroll of Ramos, Scribe of Egypt by James Anderson, I think it was. I am crappy with names sometimes. I know it was Scroll of Ramos. All of these fantastic works, all of them available through Nightmare Press. Their website will be in the description. And I think that's all I got. Deuces.